You won't believe what happened to this black man. He was arrested, but the reason behind it will make you angry. An absurd situation that could happen to any of us. Stay until the end to find out how it all happened and what led to this injustice. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Ramon and his son, Lucas, were walking towards Parque Central, enjoying the beautiful day. "It's a beautiful day, right, my son?" asked Ramon, trying to start a conversation. But Lucas, like never before, seemed more distracted than usual, looking around without responding. Ramon, without being shaken, smiled and continued with his hand on his son's blonde hair, while the other held his hand tightly. When they passed by an ice cream shop, Ramon, trying to cheer the boy up, suggested, "How about some ice cream?" Lucas, still silent, nodded slightly. "Vanilla for you, chocolate for me," said Ramon, as he placed the order. The ice cream shop was crowded and noisy, but Lucas didn't seem very comfortable. Noticing this, Ramon led him outside, to an empty bench in the square. It was there, while Lucas was calmly eating his ice cream, that Ramon noticed something strange. A woman, around 50 years old, was watching them intensely. She approached and, with a serious tone, asked, "Did this man do something to your son?" Lucas remained silent, without looking at her. Ramon, surprised and furious, replied, "Madam, that's my son." The woman, however, didn't seem convinced and continued looking suspiciously. "I'm just trying to help," she said, still looking at Lucas. "There are so many bad things happening out there." "We're fine, thank you," interrupted Ramon, already pulling Lucas to his feet. "Come on, Lucas, let's find a quieter place." They walked away, but Ramon couldn't forget the woman's look. Sitting on another bench, he looked at his son, still distraught. "Sorry, son. Some people worry too much," he tried to explain, forcing a smile. Lucas finally looked at his father, finishing his ice cream. They walked to a farther bench, trying to avoid the woman who bothered them earlier. But it wasn't long before she followed them again. Her face was contorted with rage as she approached. "You are not the father of this child. Where are his parents?" The accusation was clear, and Ramon's reaction was instantaneous. "Just because my son is a different color doesn't mean we're not father and son," he replied firmly, keeping Lucas close to him. Without another word, the woman walked away, but Ramon couldn't relax. He knew something was wrong. "Let's go, son," he said, trying to remain calm. But the tranquility was short-lived. As they approached the exit, the sound of police sirens echoed through the park. And soon the woman reappeared, now accompanied by 2 police officers. "It's him," pointed out the woman, accusing Ramon with wrong conviction. The police approached, and Ramon's heart raced. "Sir, we need to verify your identity," the police officer said with a serious tone. Ramon tried to remain calm, explaining that Lucas was his adopted son. But, to his surprise, the police insisted, "I need you to come with us to the police station." What started as a simple outing with her son soon turned into a situation that could change their lives forever. And the question that remains is, how far will this prejudice go? Stay until the end to see how it all ends. Ramon felt a wave of anger and despair when he saw the woman touching his son and talking like that. "Don't touch my son!" he shouted, trying to catch up to Lucas, but the police were faster. They held him tightly, pressing him against the car and handcuffing him. Ramon struggled to remain calm. He didn't want to make the situation worse in front of Lucas, who was now in tears. "We'll sort this out at the police station, sir." "It's better to cooperate," said one of the police officers, while the other tried to calm Lucas, moving him away from the woman who accused him. As Ramon was taken to the police car, his gaze met Lucas's, full of confusion and fear. He tried to smile, forcing a gesture of calm, but within himself he knew that this was far from being resolved. Inside the police car, handcuffed and shaken, Ramon watched in the rearview mirror as Lucas was placed in another car. The woman who reported him was visibly excited, talking to the police. "I want him arrested. People like him are the worst kind possible," she exclaimed angrily. But the story was still far from over. The woman, whose name was Margarita, shouted for a certain Lara. A woman who was passing through the park, and who was Margarita's neighbor, quickly approached. "What happened?" Lara asked. "I'm doing it justice," Daisy replied with a triumphant smile. "I just saved a little boy's life." While Lucas cried silently in the car, Margarita tried to start a conversation with him, but he didn't respond. And the question is, how will this story end? What is actually happening here? Stay until the end to discover the truth behind this absurd accusation. Margarita watched Lucas with a look of pity. "Poor thing, he must be so scared of that man that he can't even speak," she thought, feeling increasingly justified in her action. Meanwhile, at the police station, Ramon was handcuffed, the cold metal increasing his feeling of helplessness. "No need for that," he said calmly to a police officer, who just ignored him with a sidelong look. Through the small window in the room, Ramon saw Margarita next to Lucas, speaking to the boy in silence, and this made him even more irritated. But this time he held back. "Where are the boy's parents?" asked one of the police officers. "I'm his father. I already told you he's adopted," replied Ramon, trying to remain calm. The police officer looked on skeptically. "We asked the boy, but he didn't answer." "How do we know you're his father?" another officer suggested, his tone suspicious. "My son has autism. That's why he doesn't speak," explained Ramon, trying hard not to lose control. The police officer, visibly doubtful, murmured, "I don't know. The boy seemed very scared." "Of course he was scared," Ramon exclaimed, frustration rising. The woman pulled him close to her, the sounds of sirens, the dog barking, and even saw his father being arrested in front of him. "Maintain respect," the officer scolded him, standing up. Ramon swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain calm. He looked at Lucas through the window again, seeing the boy sitting in a chair, with Margarita by his side, talking incessantly. This lit a fire of determination within Ramon. "Please, I need to speak to my lawyer," he said, trying to impose some order on the chaotic situation. The officer nodded and left, probably to make the call. While he waited, Ramon kept his gaze fixed on Lucas, promising himself that he would solve this, no matter what it took. A few minutes later, a police officer named Julia entered. "The lawyer has been contacted and will come soon," she said, with a look that seemed to convey sympathy. "Your son has autism. It's not easy to adopt a child with special needs," she commented thoughtfully. Ramon felt a mixture of gratitude and pain. "I love him. It doesn't matter if it's my blood or not. He's my son," he said firmly. Julia looked at Ramon with a curious expression. "Tell me more about him. What made you decide to adopt him?" he asked, sitting across from you. Ramon sighed, his memories taking over. "I had a couple of friends. I met them a long time ago. They were troubled people, and when they got pregnant, I followed the pregnancy. However, I was promoted and had to move to another city. I spent years away and lost contact with them. Years later, I went back to visit them. What I found was devastating. Lucas was lying on the floor, crying, while his parents were fighting. This was nothing new for them, but the situation got worse every day. Lucas had no affection, no care. He was the one who suffered the most," said Ramon, his voice choked with emotion. "I spent a lot of time with him, even without him speaking. We started to get closer, and suddenly I already considered him my son. When my friends finally gave up taking care of him, I discovered that they tried to hand him over to his grandmother, but she also refused. And Lucas was already spending more time with me than with them. It was only recently that custody was given to me," concluded Ramon, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Julia listened intently, her expression softening as Ramon spoke. "And this woman, do you know that she made this complaint just because of her color?" he asked, sadness in his words. Julia nodded, her expression sad. "I know, but unfortunately my colleagues don't see things that way. It's difficult to change some perceptions," she confessed. "I just want this all to be resolved quickly," Ramon said, looking at the clock on the wall. "Lucas needs me, and I need him. I can't leave him alone now." Julia stood up, looking more determined. "I'll do what I can to help. I'll talk to my colleagues and see what I can do to speed up the process. Your story is clear, and I see how much you love your son." She left the room and, for the first time, Ramon felt a glimmer of hope. He knew that the battle was far from over, but the presence of Julia, an unexpected ally, gave him strength. Moments later, Julia returned, accompanied by Mario, Ramon's lawyer. "I'm going to make them pay for what they did to you, my friend," said Mario, shaking Ramon's hand firmly. "I just want to get out of here with my son," Ramon replied, his voice tired but relieved to see his lawyer. A few minutes later, a police officer approached and removed Ramon's handcuffs. "It has been proven that you are indeed Lucas' adoptive father," the police officer announced. Ramon took a deep breath, rubbing his wrists, which were slightly marked by the handcuffs. He followed the officer into the hallway, where Lucas was. Upon seeing his father, Lucas quickly got up and ran to him, hugging him tightly. Margarita, who was next to Lucas, was unable to hide her indignation. "Why did they release this man? The boy is scared. He doesn't speak. Is he going to be arrested?" she protested. Ramon felt a surge of anger, but held it in, taking a deep breath. It was at that moment that Lucas, upon seeing his father, ran towards him, hugging him tightly. Margarita, unable to hide her disdain, commented, "Poor child, living with a man like that." Ramon was about to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of Julia, who seemed relieved to see the situation resolved. "I see everything has been resolved," she said, smiling. "Yes, thank you for your help," thanked Ramon, keeping Lucas close to him. But the story wasn't over yet. What will happen next? How will Margarita's complaint affect this family? Stay with us to see how this resolves. "Stay a little longer," interrupted Julia, with a suddenly serious tone. "But why?" asked Ramon, a shadow of concern crossing his face. Something was happening, and he felt that it would change everything. "A new thing has come up, and we need you to stay," Julia explained. "Do you know a man called Tullio?" Ramon, now more confused, replied, "Yes, I know. Tullio is my friend. He is Lucas' biological father." Julia looked closely at his reaction before turning to Margarita. "And what about you? Do you know a man called Tullio?" he asked, with an intensity that made Margarita stutter. "My God!" exclaimed Margarita, putting her hand over her mouth, the realization hitting her like a punch. "Is Lucas my grandson? You filed a complaint against the man who adopted your grandson? And you didn't know that the boy was your grandson?" asked Julia, with a stern tone. "This is a false accusation, and making such a report is a crime." Margarita, astonished, barely managed to respond, stammering, I didn't know." Julia, without wasting time, took Margarita to a room for interrogation. Ramon, still processing the turn of events, hugged Lucas tighter, relieved by the support of his lawyer and police officer Julia. Meanwhile, Ramon wondered what had happened to Margarita to make her make such a serious accusation. Margarita's past began to unfold in her mind. Decades ago, Margaret was a young woman with a marriage that seemed promising, until conflicts began to destroy everything. When she discovered she was pregnant with Tullio, she had to make a difficult decision: stay in a failed marriage or raise the child alone. The pressure forced her to stay with her husband, but the fights continued, and the turbulent climate affected Tullio deeply. Everything got worse when Margarita's husband ran away with another woman, leaving her devastated and not knowing how to raise her son. Her frustration grew, and she began to constantly criticize her son. When Tullio turned 18, she made a drastic decision and kicked him out of the house, without looking back. Years later, Margarita received an unexpected visit from Tullio. But he was not alone. "Mom, I want to introduce you to your grandson," he said, with a mixture of hesitation and hope. But Margarita, cold and distant, did not show the slightest interest. "I don't want that boy," she replied without hesitation, already tired of her own frustrations. "It can be put up for adoption." And so, Margarita moved away from her son and grandson, isolating herself even further in a world of bitterness. Tullio tried to raise Lucas, but the pressure of being a single father, especially of a child with special needs, became unsustainable. Now everything was back, and the truth was about to be revealed. How could Margarita have made such a serious mistake, without even knowing that she was accusing her own grandson? How will this affect Lucas and Ramon's lives? Stay with us to find out what happens next and how this complicated story unfolds. The pressure was unbearable for Tullio, and he made the painful decision to give Lucas up for adoption, believing that another family could offer what he couldn't. It was then that Ramon entered the boy's life, offering the love and stability that Margarita and Tullio were never able to provide. But now, the truth was about to be revealed. At the police station, Margarita's interrogation continued, and her answers became increasingly hesitant. "So why did you report Ramon?" insisted the police officer, his gaze fixed and rigid as he wrote down the answers. "Because it's clear he's not the boy's father," replied Margarita, avoiding the policeman's gaze. "Was that because of his color?" the officer asked, trying to capture any trace of hesitation. "Of course he does. It's clear he's not the father," she finally admitted, revealing the prejudice that motivated her accusation. The policeman pressed, "But what made you suspect he would do something bad to the child?" Margarita stuttered, unable to explain. "I don't know. I don't know. She muttered, and the atmosphere in the room seemed to grow heavier, with the truth about to crumble. Ramon, waiting next to Julia, was still processing everything he had just heard. When the police officer asked about Margarita's past, he didn't know what to expect. "I didn't know," he said, referring to the troubled relationship between Margarita and Tullio. "Tullio spoke a few times about his mother, but I never saw her. They barely speak to each other, maybe once or twice a year." Julia, tired, began to prepare to leave. "I think you two are tired. You can go. Anything, I'll let you know." "And her?" asked Ramon, his voice full of concern. "Will she be released?" "Probably," sighed Julia, frustrated. "For me, it's clear why the complaint was made, but without more evidence, we can't do much." Leaving the police station, the fatigue was palpable. In the taxi, Ramon saw Margarita leaving, her gaze quick and unmistakable. But what did it mean? Confusion? Repentance? Or pure indifference? Upon arriving home, Ramon carried Lucas to bed, the boy exhausted after the tense day. When he finally lay down on the couch, the weight of the journey crushed him, and soon he fell asleep without realizing it, still half sitting, reflecting on the chaos his life had become. But the surprise didn't stop there. The next day, insistent knocking on the door woke Ramon abruptly. Disoriented, he opened the door, being startled to see Julia there, with a small envelope in her hands. "Good morning. You forgot your ID at the police station. I came to return it." "Thanks," Ramon said, accepting the envelope and allowing her to enter. Inside the house, Julia observed Lucas, sitting at the table, focused on his breakfast. "Good morning, Lucas," she said softly, touching his hair. To Ramon's surprise, Lucas offered a slight smile. "He never likes strangers touching him," said Ramon, surprised. "I guess it's because we have something in common," replied Julia with a smile. I also have autism, to a lesser degree, but it still affects my life. And like you, I was adopted. Julia's words broke the ice. She shared her own adoption experience and how her adoptive parents had changed her life. My biological parents were complicated. I barely remember them, but my adoptive parents saved me. Ramon, touched by her story, offered her coffee. Do you want a coffee? He asked. I would love, replied Julia. They talked about adoption, autism, and the complexities of life, a rare but powerful connection that brought them together in that moment. It's time for my shift, said Julia, checking her watch. But if you want, I can come by another day. I would love, replied Ramon with a smile, and they said goodbye. But Lucas, watching closely, looked at his father with intensity. What's wrong, son? Asked Ramon, noticing the boy's curious look. Why are you looking like that? What was Lucas thinking? What did this visit mean to him? The truth was still unfolding, and Ramon and Lucas' journey was far from over. What came next could change everything. Stay tuned, because nothing is what it seems in this story, full of mysteries, revelations, and raw emotions. I'm just being polite to the lady, explained Ramon, trying to look away from his son, who seemed to be analyzing every word carefully. But meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Margarita was at home, mulling over the latest events. That man is raising my grandson, she thought, a mixture of anger and confusion taking over. For some reason, that reality bothered her much more than she imagined. Alone, she reflected on everything that had happened. I need to see my grandson one more time, he decided, feeling an urgent need to reconnect. Was it to correct his mistakes, or just to look at the boy with different eyes now that the truth was revealed? I can no longer ignore the bond that, whether I like it or not, binds me to Lucas. Meanwhile, Julia and Ramon began to meet every day. The mornings, initially simple, soon turned into something deeper and more meaningful. One day, over coffee, Julia decided to open her heart. I have a secret to tell you, but don't tell anyone, she said, her serious tone breaking the lightness of the room. Tell me, my mouth is a tomb, replied Ramon, curious and a little worried. What would she have to say? You know your identity, right? It wasn't you who forgot it. I was the one who took it and kept it somewhere else, Julia confessed, looking at him with a mix of hesitation and sincerity. I did it to have the opportunity to talk to you again. Ramon was surprised. Talk to me? Why? He asked, without understanding. When you told Lucas' story, I felt so connected to you that I couldn't let it go, she explained, finally facing him. Ramon smiled, touched by the sincerity. Thanks for caring, but I'm just an ordinary person, he replied, trying to shake off the idea that it was anything special. You're special, Ramon, she said, placing her hand over his. The touch was soft but full of meaning. The two approached and were about to kiss when, suddenly, Lucas appeared at the door of the room, watching them curiously. Wow, your perfume is really good, said Ramon, trying to disguise the situation. Julia laughed, recognizing the need to keep everything light in front of Lucas. I think it's time for me to go, she said, still smiling, but already knowing it was time to leave. Over the next few days, the tension between the two grew until, finally, they were alone and shared their first kiss. Julia's presence not only brought happiness to Ramon, but also to Lucas, who seemed more excited and happy by her side. One day, the three of them went for a walk in the park, looking like a happy and complete family. But destiny had something more to show. Daisy, who was also at the park with her puppy, saw the three of them in the distance. When he looked at Ramon, Lucas, and Julia together, he felt a wave of anger and spite. The scene before her eyes was exactly what she didn't want to happen. My grandson can't be raised by him, and now there's that woman, thought Margarita, watching them with cold eyes. She didn't come any closer, but she was already scheming something that could take them away from Lucas. Julia, always attentive, noticed Margarita's presence and decided not to mention anything to Ramon. She didn't want to ruin that perfect day. Together, the three continued their walk, laughing and joking, oblivious to Margarita's malicious gaze. Later, Ramon and Julia were having breakfast together, when he made an unexpected proposal. "I think you should move to my house. You spend all day here, why not move in for good?" "Is this an invitation?" asked Julia, curiosity shining in her eyes. "Yes, and don't worry, you're a police officer, you won't arrest me for this," joked Ramon. Julia smiled widely, clearly moved by the idea. "I would love to live here," she replied, emotion evident in her voice. But at that moment, Lucas appeared at the kitchen door. His hesitant steps indicated that he was about to say something important. "Good morning, son," Ramon said, turning his attention to the boy. "Good morning, Dad," Lucas replied, his words sounding like music to Ramon's ears. The impact was immediate. Those were Lucas's first words to him. Ramon felt a wave of emotion take over his heart, and tears welled up in his eyes. "I'm so happy," he said, his voice breaking. Julia, touched by the scene, was also moved and cried along with him. "I know, my love," she responded, hugging them, sharing that moment of pure family happiness. But what would Margaret do next? Was she willing to go to any lengths necessary to separate Ramon and Lucas? The story was just beginning, and secrets were still about to be revealed. Luke's first words were just the beginning. Over time, he began to talk more, each day bringing new words, new phrases. "Tomorrow at school, the teachers are taking us to the zoo. I want to see a chicken," he said, eyes shining with excitement. Julia, laughing at her innocence, replied, "I don't think there are chickens at the zoo, but you might see an eagle." Lucas, without wasting time, adapted his plans. "That's it, I think it is." "Shall we go for a walk in the park?" suggested Ramon, wanting to make the most of the day. "Come on," Lucas shouted, joy written all over his face. It was a scene of pure happiness, and Ramon watched the boy transform. From a silent boy, Lucas now talked non-stop, his sociability blossoming before their eyes. At the park, Lucas joined other children, running and playing freely. Ramon and Julia relaxed a little, just watching from a distance. But, in a moment of distraction, when they turned to get something from their bag, Lucas disappeared. Ramon's heart accelerated. "Lucas!" they both shouted, their worry growing by the second. They began searching frantically, calling his name, asking other children and parents, but no one knew where he was. Panic took over Ramon, and Julia, trying to remain calm, called the police. "He couldn't have gone very far," she tried to reassure him, but Ramon's anguish was palpable. What once seemed like a perfect day now turned into a nightmare. Meanwhile, in a secluded part of the park, Margarita pulled Lucas by the arm, her mind filled with a mixture of uncontrolled emotions. "If you get lost, you might lose custody of him," she thought, not caring about the fear on the boy's face. Lucas was about to cry, when a familiar voice interrupted the tense silence. "Mother!" Margarita quickly turned around, and shock took over her face when she saw Thulium, her son, whom she hadn't seen in years. "Thulium?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What are you doing with Lucas?" Tullio, with a tone of concern mixed with disapproval, replied, "How did you know I was here? I left the rehab clinic a few days ago. I come here almost every day to talk to you, but I didn't have the courage. But now seeing that you're with Ramon, I see that it was a good choice not to leave him with you," explained Tullio, with a hard expression. Before any more words were exchanged, Julia and Ramon arrived. Lucas broke free from Margarita's arms and ran to Ramon, seeking safety in his father's arms. "Sorry, Mom, but you can't see others happy," Tullio continued, looking fixedly at Margarita. "When my father left us, you took out all your frustration on me. I suffered a lot, and I still do. You just can't stand to see others happy because you never were." Tullio's words were like a blow. Margarita, unable to defend herself, began to cry. The tears flowed freely as she finally acknowledged that, perhaps, her son was right. The worst of all was realizing that the bad feelings she carried, they were a shadow of what she still couldn't understand. Envy. A feeling so corrosive that it consumes from the inside out, and Margarita felt it intensely. She watched Ramon, Julia, and Lucas, and all she saw was a happiness she never had. They formed a solid family, where, even in their imperfections, they gave the best for each other. As for her, she only carried bitterness and anger, and that corroded her. "Forgive me, son," Margarita sobbed, but her words were lost amid her own screams of regret. Tullio, on the other hand, couldn't stand it any more. Unable to deal with the scene, he walked away. Ramon and Lucas rallied around him, creating a small circle of support. Julia, who was observing the scene from afar, did not hesitate. "If you ever go near him again, I swear I'll put you in jail." Margarita, devastated and consumed by guilt, fell to her knees, finally understanding the impact of her actions. She had tried to destroy someone's happiness that they never had. And now? She faced the consequences alone, watching Ramon, Julia, and Lucas walk away, resuming the walk she had interrupted. Ramon and Tullio met in a further corner of the park, where the conversation took a different turn. "You look fine," commented Ramon, evaluating Tullio. "I'm getting better. I'm out of rehab." "It hasn't been easy, but I have faith that everything will work out," replied Tullio sincerely. His gaze softened when he saw Lucas playing next to Julia. "You made him evolve so much. You were born to be a father," said Tullio, touched. Ramon smiled, feeling a hint of pride. The conversation then became more serious. "What about your mother?" asked Ramon. Tullio, with a resolute look, replied, "I'm going to visit her. After all, she's my mother. I want to help her be a better person. But I'm not going to let her destroy my life like she did before." Tullio's words reflected the maturity he had reached, overcoming suffering and adversity. Life went on. Julia and Ramon got married, and were planning to expand their family. Lucas, with the unconditional support of his parents, flourished and overcame obstacles. But, on the other hand, Tullio and Margarita tried to rebuild their family relationship, despite the hurt. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. Margarita appeared at Ramon's door. Julia, visibly surprised, went to help her. "What are you doing here?" he asked, with caution in every word. Margarita looked at Julia's large pregnant belly before responding, "I need to talk to Ramon." When Ramon appeared, the defensive stance was clear, but he was willing to listen. "What do you want?" he asked. Margarita, with difficulty, said, "I want to apologize. I'm in therapy. I realize I was the problem. I know I can't change what I did, but I needed to say this so I could live with myself." Ramon sincerely replied, "I'm glad it's changing." Margarita smiled weakly and walked away, leaving a thoughtful silence in the air. "But has she really changed?" Julia, still uncertain, murmured, "It will be." Ramon, trying to maintain hope, replied, "I hope so." Meanwhile, Lucas returned from school and passed by Margarita, without realizing the weight of the encounter. "Good morning," he said politely. "Good morning," she replied, a sad smile on her face, watching her grandson so healthy and happy. When Lucas entered the house, where love and respect reigned, Margarita stood there, thinking, "He's better. He's really better with them." But what does this mean for Margarita's future? Does she really have the ability to change? What will happen now to her and Ramon's family? If you are as curious as we are, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow all the next chapters of this story full of twists and turns.